welcome to my channel. This is Books That Bite. I wanted to start off by doing the BookTube Newbie Tag. I'm really excited about this channel and have a lot of exciting projects lined up that I think you're really gonna like. The first three questions I think can kind of be lumped together. There's why did you start this channel? What are some fun and unique things you can bring to BookTube? And what are you most excited about for this new channel? I'm just gonna lump it all together, like what brought me here in the first place and what I think I can do with the space. I first found BookTube because I would just Google, is this worth reading? And I would get led to BookTube videos. I don't really do that so much anymore because I think I've become a little more comfortable with my own taste. And just because someone on BookTube likes a book, that doesn't mean I'm gonna like it. And then something else that I actually Googled a lot would be, can someone explain the ending of this book? Sometimes I read a book and there's a big reveal at the end and I'm like, did I get that? So I often find myself Googling ending explained and I can never find those videos. There's a lot of content out there explaining the ends of classics, so I'm not going to do anything like that here on this channel. Not a literature professor, don't have a degree in literature, but I have this experience of reading a book and saying, I need to talk to someone about how that ended to see, are there multiple endings? Is there one ending and I'm missing it? What happened there? One of the things I want to try to do for this channel is explain the ending of books. So I'm going to do some research, I'm going to do some close readings, and hopefully we can come up with what the endings meant or what several possible endings were. One of the books I have in mind for this series is Our Wives Under the Sea. If you've read that, let me know. I think that would be a good place to start for the Ending Explained series since the ending is kind of mysterious. With that being said, something I have in mind for this channel is a ton of spoilers. I am really interested in talking about what actually happens in a book. I'm not interested in marketing books. I don't work in the publishing industry. For me, reading is something I do for fun on the side. And because it's fun, I want to really be able to delve in and talk about what happens. And I think some of that, like back and forth, getting into what really went down there, some of that's missing from BookTube a little bit. That kind of dovetails pretty easily into what I think I can bring to BookTube. So like I mentioned, I have a few series in mind. I'm definitely going to be doing that Ending Explained series. But one series I have that I'm super excited for, I'm going to do a series where I eat every food item that appears in a book. So I had this idea. My wife came up with the name Books That Bite, which I think is excellent. And something I'm excited for about that challenge is in high fantasy, we talk a lot about world building. But what about in modern romance novels or literary fiction? There's world building in every book. I'm really fascinated about the way authors create their worlds. So some of the things in books that I really want to analyze are the food in books. What are the characters eating? How are they feeding themselves? The clothes in books. What are they wearing? What would I feel like if I wore what the character wore? Where do they live? Some of these little or smaller circumstantial details I think really add to the character. They also add to the feel of the book, the vibe, that indescribable something that just the summary alone can't give you. So I'm gonna do my Eating My Way Through Books series. The very first video is already available. You can check it out. The first book I did was Sally Rooney's Beautiful World, Where Are You? The next question on the BookTube Newbie Tags, why do you love reading? I think that's a really broad question. It could be answered in a lot of ways. And I think the answer has probably changed over the course of my life. I remember when I was younger, I read in a very competitive way where I would want to finish this book before someone else. We used to get this summer reading challenge in elementary school where your parents would have to sign off every day that you read in the summer. And I loved trying to get an award for reading the most books in summer. So there was a competitive element to why I loved reading. And some of that's still there. Now it's mostly competitive with myself. I do a lot of those challenges. I like to see how many books I can read in a year. So part of it's competitive. Another reason that I really love reading is the social aspect. Even though reading is a pretty solitary experience, most of the times you're reading by yourself, I've always loved talking about the books I'm reading with the people in my life. So whether that was classmates when I was in school, friends, family members, now I talk about reading with my wife all the time. I'm in a book club. I just love talking about reading and hearing what other people think. And I think that's also part of why I love watching videos on YouTube, because of that social aspect where I think it's fascinating when you both consume the same piece of media and you take different things away from it. It really tells you a lot about yourself and about that other person. So I think reading and talking about books can really foster and deepen relationships and friendships. So that's probably one of my favorite things about books, is it's like a nice little window into the minds of people you care about. Something I see a lot of people say on BookTube is they love reading because they love to like feel all the feelings and they want something that's going to make them cry. And I think, honestly, I couldn't disagree with that more. I am not interested in books that are going to rip my heart out. And I think that's because like life is already going to rip your heart out. You know, like capitalism is going to rip your heart out. Tragedies in life are going to rip your heart out. There's already hardship to living. And I think the benefit of hobbies like reading these are aspects of our life that we can control. You know, we can't control sickness, we can't control death. We can control like what we do with our Saturday. Why would I choose something that's going to make me miserable? So, and with that said, you know, I do like to read things that are uplifting, but the types of books that I find uplifting, joyful, the story could be about anything, but where the perspective of the book, even if it's not the perspective of the character, the perspective of the book is hope and love for life. That's what I like to read. So an example I'll give is I've recently read this book that my wife recommended, A Long Time Dead. And that book, you wouldn't think of as being necessarily a hopeful book. It's about vampires. They're dead, right? What could be hopeful about that? But the character herself, she loves life so much. She loves like the visceral, sensual experiences of life. She loves food, like she loves intimacy. She just loves everything. And when she becomes a vampire, she doesn't think, oh my God, I'm dead. She thinks, oh, I'm alive forever. And just her, you know, excited, her hopeful, optimistic view on this eternal life she gets as a vampire, I think is really fun and hopeful. The next question on the tag is, what book or series got you into reading? Okay, so I've always loved reading, but I can think very clearly of a few series that I just ate up as a kid, and they really solidified my love of reading. One is the Edge Chronicles. I don't know if anyone has read that. I loved these books. Basically, well, this kind of means something different nowadays, but it took place on a flat earth. It was a different world that was flat, and there was literally an edge that you could fall off. And the characters traveled across. It started in this ecosystem called the Deep Woods. Then they would travel through something called the Mire, I think. And then eventually they get to this city. The city was floating on like a little moon, basically, of the planet in the sky. It was so cool. There were a bunch of creatures. And my favorite like aesthetic element of this book was there were pirate ships that flied in the sky. And it was just such a beautiful touch. I loved living in that world. It was one of those books that had maps in the front. Like you really got into it. And I read those books with my cousin. We would go back and forth reading them and talking about them. That goes back to like that sense of community being something I love about reading, and the world building. That was awesome. Another series I really loved as a kid was a series of unfortunate events. This one I had a race with a friend from school. Books were coming out right when I was the right age to be reading them. So when each new book would come out, we would see who could read it the fastest. Loved those books. Obviously, you know, the movie was nothing in comparison. I also really love the Spiderwick Chronicles, which a lot of these books have very similar themes. The Spiderwick Chronicles was really cool because there were companion books you could get with them. So I forget what it was called. It was like a field guide or something. So it was framed as though it was a real field guide to help you find these magical creatures. They would give you like tips and tricks for how to find the creatures that appeared in the book. And I 100% followed those tips and tricks to try to find these creatures in my backyard in Brooklyn, New York, and it didn't work. Another book series that really helped me get into reading that I loved so much was The Hardy Boys. I used to read these from my elementary school library. Something I love about these books is there are just so many of them. And in every single one of the two brothers gets knocked unconscious, I swear. I haven't gone back to confirm, but that's what it felt like. And this was before we talked about like traumatic brain injuries, but looking back, I'm like, those boys must have had so much brain damage. I never was much of a Nancy Drew girl, which I think might have just been like some internalized misogyny, but I always preferred the Hardy Boys, and I love the aesthetic so much that actually recently I bought these books. They're notebooks, but they're made out of old Hardy Boys covers. So it's like totally blank paper. Someone rebound an old Hardy Boys cover. I really love these books. I think they're so fun. They really inspire me to write because you can feel like the excitement and adventure. And I got these at this bookstore called Half Moon Books. They have a few locations in upstate New York. This is not what they're known for. They're like a bookstore, but this is something I love that they have. I would be remiss not to mention the American Girl series of books, the historical books. I love them so much. Again, there's another theme where I had like one friend I would associate with each book series I was reading. I had this friend who, when I think back on her now and when I refer to her, I think of her as my American Girl friend. We're not in touch anymore, but if you're watching, you know who you are. I had this American Girl friend, and we read all these books. I read all the historical girls who were, had already been written at that time, mid-2000s. But I felt a particular affinity for Kirsten. Kirsten was my girl. She's the doll I had. Loved her so much. I can even still remember the quote when Kirsten was learning to read in English because she was Swedish, and she had to learn a poem and she had to recite it in front of her class. And I can recite the poem that Kirsten recited in the book because that's how deeply these books run through my veins. I also love the Josefina books because I had normally the American Girl doll books are these thin books and you buy each one in the series. But for Josefina, I had one book that was all of the books bound together and the pages were gold on the sides, like gold colored. And there was a ribbon in the middle of the book. Oh, it was beautiful. It was beautiful. And I love how there was pictures in the front of the book, which would tell you everyone in the girls' families you could keep track of. Like Kirsten, she had a lot of siblings. There was a lot to keep track of. So it was necessary. This is the girl who helped me love reading. I love her so much. I might talk a little bit more about American Girl dolls in this series. I know they're getting a resurgence, and it's like the most beautiful thing that's ever happened to me. If you guys haven't listened to the podcast or read the book Dolls of Our Lives, do it. I was lucky enough to meet the author. We went to one of her author events, and I brought my Kirsten, and it was very fulfilling, wholesome, full circle. It was so beautiful. One of the theses of their book is that American Girl does introduce a lot of girls to history because both of the women who host the podcast are historians who loved American Girl as kids. And I think American Girl also introduced a lot of girls to reading because not only did you want all their cool stuff, you also wanted to know the context for the stuff. So I had, her lunchbox and her school supplies set, but it was important to also read about what happened when she went to school, which was she learned a new language. The next question is, when did you start reading? That's an impossible question because I think like a lot of people, I grew up reading. I always loved reading. My parents always read to me when I was young, so I have a lot of core memories with reading. My first word as a baby was the word book. So I don't know if that means I was destined to make a YouTube channel one day. Something that I think fostered a love of books would be my mom's example. So my mom has a book club. She founded this book club after I was born because she felt, when she was staying home with me, she was always hanging out with the baby and she wasn't talking to adults about interesting things. So she founded this book club as a way to meet up with her friends every month and discuss these books. The book club has been going strong for so many years, and a lot of the women in my family are in my mom's book club. So I think I grew up surrounded by women talking about books. At any family gathering, I would just say, oh, how do you like the latest book club book? Even though I wasn't in the book club, I always knew what the book was. My mom and my aunts were always reading it, and it was just a part of the social fabric of our family. And I think that was a great example that she set, which I know wasn't the reason she did it, but it was great. It fostered my own love of reading. The next question is, where do you read? I will say that I mostly read during my commute on the subway, and then for audiobooks, I listen to audiobooks while I'm doing mundane tasks or while I'm walking somewhere or riding my bike. Sometimes I read at home in this chair, but that's probably not the norm. This is a good question. What kind of books do you like to read? So I like to read many different genres. I love memoirs. I do like romance novels, speculative fiction, magical realism. I like sci-fi. I like fantasy. Like, there's something in almost every genre that I like, but I think the theme for whatever the genre is I really love reading LGBT books, feminist books, and books by women authors. So if I think I've probably read a book in every genre that's LGBT in some way. I've definitely read a book in every genre that was written by a woman or told through a feminist lens. I like books that I can relate to, even if the characters' lives are not the same as mine. I like knowing that we're both not coming from a place of misogyny. It's like how I said I don't like to read a book that's going to make me cry because, sad things in life will make you cry. I feel like I don't need to read a book that's misogynistic because there's enough misogyny out there anyway. Why seek it out in my spare time? And then the last question, what does your book collection look like? So I mentioned I do read some audiobooks, so not all my books are physical. I also love to borrow books from the library, so I don't own all the books. But for the books that I do own, I will say, I'm not going to do an apartment tour, but my wife did build these absolutely beautiful bookshelves for me. I think we both always wanted books up on the ceilings. It's a small apartment to maximize space and draw your eyes up. I think it's just so pretty. So I always wanted shelves up by the ceiling. And a few years ago, I went away on vacation. While I was away, she hung all the shelves herself, put all the books up there herself. And when I came back, it was like the coolest, best surprise. Such a sweet thing she did. So we have like very cool bookshelves up near the ceiling, and I have them organized into genre and labeled with a label maker. So that's what the collection looks like. But basically, that was my BookTube Newbie Tag. I hope you can stick around. Like I mentioned, the first video is already on my channel, so you can go ahead and check that out. I'm so excited to hear what books you guys think would work for those different series I mentioned, the ending explained and the eating my way through. I'm really excited to continue the conversation about books with you guys. And share some of the things I've read, things I want to read, and I think we can discover some pretty cool things by talking about books in this hopeful, exciting way. Yeah, I'm just excited. So, cheers. Cheers.